I didn't think a game like that would be a hit, no matter how cool it looked. It seemed like it was made for a really small group of people. But Agile just smiled again with his big grin. I thought the same thing, he said. But it's actually selling really well, and you know why? He paused for a moment before answering his own question. Because in the game you can fly. I raised an eyebrow. Fly, I repeated. Agile nodded. Yeah, everyone in the game is a fairy, so they all have wings. This game has an amazing feature, you can fly around inside it. At first it might take some getting used to, but once you master it, you can soar through the air, without needing a controller. I was totally blown away by this idea. There have been lots of flying games out since the Nerve Gear came out, but they all required using some kind of device to control the flight. Imagine being able to soar through the air like a bird, but in a virtual world. The problem is humans don't have wings, so it's hard to make flying feel real in a game. When you're playing, your movements are supposed to match what your body can do in real life. So even if a game gives you virtual wings, it's not like you can really flap them with your muscles. By the time Asuna and I finished playing SAO, we were super good at jumping. We could jump so high that it felt like we were flying, but it wasn't really flying, we were just jumping really far. It was more like following a curvy path through the air, not actually flapping our arms to stay up. That sounds incredible, someone said. And it really was. Hey, how do you make the wings work? Someone asked. The response was honest, no idea, but it's super tough. Beginners have to use a special stick in one hand to control them. There was a pause. For a moment, I actually thought it sounded like fun to give it a try. But then I took a big gulp of hot coffee to calm myself down. Alright, so that's the game, I said, trying to sound casual. Wait, what's the deal with that picture? Agile asked, pulling out a glossy sheet of paper from under the counter. He slapped it down on the bar. It was the same photo again. What do you think? He asked, looking at me curiously. I stared at the picture for a bit, taking it in. The girl in the photo looked really familiar. She looks just like Asuna, I said finally. Agile nodded, like he already knew that. So you agree, he said with a hint of a smile. I showed him a screenshot from the game, but it was already as big as it could get. Just tell me, where did you take this picture? I asked. It was inside Alfheim Online, he replied. Agile took the game box from my hands and flipped it over. On the back cover, surrounded by descriptions and other screenshots, was a cool illustration of the game world. Imagine a big round map divided into sections for each of the fairy groups. These sections spread out from a gigantic tree in the center. This huge tree is called the World Tree. Agile explained, pointing to the picture. The goal of the game is to be the first player to reach the top of the tree before the other fairy groups get there. You might think it's easy, just fly up, right? Not so fast. It turns out that flying has a time limit, so it's not as simple as just soaring to the top. You can't soar through the air forever. Eventually you'll come crashing back down to reality. And let's be honest, you won't even be able to reach the lowest branch of a tree by trying to fly on your own. But there are always people who think they can defy gravity. Like the time I heard about a group of 5 friends who came up with a crazy plan. They stood on each other's shoulders, from lightest to heaviest, and tried to reach the branches like a human rocket ship. It was actually kind of genius. In a super silly way. Haha, that's pretty clever, I thought. And you know what? Their plan almost worked. They got really close to touching those branches. They didn't quite make it to the lowest point, but the last person in the group took some screenshots to prove how high they were. One of those shots showed something really weird, a huge birdcage dangling from a branch. A birdcage, I thought, my eyebrows scrunching up at the creepy idea. Being trapped in a birdcage was not cool. When we zoomed in on the screenshot as close as we could, that's all we could see. But this is a real game, right? I picked up the box and took a closer look. The name RCT Progress was printed on the bottom of the case. I showed it to Kirito and asked, "Hey, what's going on? You look really upset." He just shook his head and said, "Nothing." But then he turned to Agile and asked, "Do you have any other pictures? Maybe something that shows other players like Asuna, who got stuck in SAO, and are now trapped in Alfheim Online." Agile's eyebrows scrunched up as he thought about it. He shook his head and said, "I haven't heard anything about that." "I'm positive. I would have called the police if I'd known for sure," I said. The other person just replied, "Yeah, I'm sure you would have." But as I nodded in agreement, My mind started to wander back to what Nobuyuki Shugu had told me. He claimed that he was in charge of the SAO servers, but saying they were under his control wasn't entirely accurate. The server was like a locked box, and nobody could get inside. It seemed like the person in charge wanted Asuna to stay asleep while she was connected to it. Then something weird happened. Someone who looked just like Asuna was seen playing a different virtual reality game. This new game was made by a company called RCT. I wondered if this was just a coincidence, or if something more was going on. For a moment I thought about telling the rescue team at the ministry, but then I realized I didn't have any proof to show them. I looked up at Agil, the owner of the cafe where I was sitting. He's a big burly guy. Agil, can I play this game? I asked him. He smiled and said, go ahead, be my guest. Are you going in? Yeah, I need to see it for myself, I said. Agil looked worried for a second, and I didn't blame him. Part of me thought this was a crazy idea, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. It was like a tiny spark of fear was flickering at my feet. I pushed the bad feeling aside and gave Agil a smile. A game where you can't really die. That sounds too good to be true. People can be really picky these days. I was thinking of getting a new game console, but then I got some good news. Don't worry, someone told me, Atmosphere Games will work on a Nerve gear. It's basically the same thing, just with better security. That was a relief. This saves me some cash, I said with a smile. My friend Agil gave me a funny look. If you're brave enough to wear that helmet again, that is, he joked. I just shrugged. I've done it plenty of times already, I said. And it was true, I'd worn that helmet a dozen times before. I had worn the Nerve Gear headset many times before, but only to check my online connection. I hadn't actually played any games. I was really hoping that Asuna would have sent me a message. But when I checked, there was nothing. No voicemail, no text messages. It was time to stop waiting around. I finished my coffee, stood up and decided to take action. I had to dig into my pocket for some coins to pay at the counter. The place wasn't fancy, so they didn't take any kind of digital payments. As I was leaving, I said, thanks for the coffee. Let me know if you find out anything new. My friend replied, I'll add that to your tab. Just don't forget to rescue Asuna more, we're not done yet. We bumped fists and made a plan to meet up in person soon. Then I headed out the door. When I got home, my sister Suguha was lying on her bed, face down in her pillow. She was kicking her legs back and forth, clearly really upset. It was already almost noon. But she was still wearing her pajamas. Monday, January 20th, had finally arrived. Winter vacation was a distant memory, but Suga's school had a cool perk for graduating students like her. Attendance was optional near the end of the year. Since she and her friends were super busy prepping for high school entrance exams, she only went to campus if she felt like it. Usually that meant popping into the kendo club to say hi. Suga's mind kept wandering back to the same memory. She had spent the night before snuggled up under Kazuto's covers, trying to warm him up with her body heat. As they cuddled close, she drifted off to sleep. Even now she couldn't stop thinking about it. She had never hated her ability to fall asleep so fast before. As soon as she lay down, she was out cold in just 10 seconds. Now she was paying the price. She silently screamed at herself, feeling like the biggest idiot ever. She pounded her pillow with both fists, frustrated and annoyed. If only she had woken up before Kazuto, she could have slipped away without him noticing. But no, he had to be the one to wake her up. And now he knew she was in his bed. She couldn't bear to look at him again. Her chest felt like it was going to burst from the mix of embarrassment, shyness, and a sweet feeling that lingered inside her. It hurt so much she could hardly breathe. To make matters worse, she caught a whiff of her brother's scent on her pajamas when she wrapped her arms around her head. This only added to her distress. She needed to shake off these feelings, so she stood up and decided to practice with her shinai. Swinging it around might help clear her head. Suguha loved practicing in the dojo because it helped her focus. But she knew she had to get outside quickly, so she changed into her tracksuit. Her brother Kazuto was out taking care of some personal stuff. And her mom Midori had already left for work. Her dad Mintaka had gone back to America after the holidays, which meant Suguha had the whole house to herself. As she rushed out to the backyard, she snatched a cheese muffin from the dining table and shoved it into her mouth. She also grabbed a box of orange juice on her way out. Just as she took a big bite, Kazuto came riding his bike around the side of the house. Their eyes locked, and suddenly Suguha's face turned bright red. A piece of muffin had gotten stuck in her throat, and she let out a weird noise, muff, as she coughed. She grabbed her orange juice and tried to take a quick sip to wash it down. But there was a problem. The straw wasn't even in the drink yet. It was still stuck in the foil on top of the box. She made another silly sound, momf, momf, as she struggled. Kazuto walked over looking amused and said, "Oh, come on." He took the juice box from her and helped out by poking one end of the straw into the lid, and the other end into Suguha's mouth. She gulped down the cold drink as fast as she could, trying to swallow a big piece of food.
Poor.
"I thought I was going to choke," she exclaimed. Her friend laughed and said, "You're so clumsy, you don't have to eat it all at once." She grumbled and took another bite of her muffin. Kazuto sat down next to her and started taking off his shoes. She sneaked a peek at him while she chewed. Then, out of the blue, he said, "About last night, Shuga." She quickly drank some more juice, hoping it would help her stop coughing.
Yes, she asked.
Kazuto seemed unsure of what to say next.
Well,
"Thanks," he said finally. Shuga was caught off guard. She had no idea what he was talking about. She looked at him with curious eyes. "Thanks for making me feel better yesterday," she said. "It really worked. I'm not giving up. I'll keep going until I save Asuna." She smiled, trying to hide the pain in her chest. "That's great," he said. "Keep it up. I've always wanted to meet Asuna. I bet you two will become awesome friends," she added. He messed up her hair and then stood up. Shugaha said goodbye, and watched as he walked up the stairs. Then she popped the last bite of her muffin into her mouth. She wondered to herself, "Am I really allowed to have feelings for him too?" She headed out to the yard to get some exercise near the pond. First she did some stretches to warm up. After that she grabbed a shinai, a special stick used for practicing sword fighting, and started swinging it around. Usually the steady motion helped clear her mind, but not today. Her thoughts stuck with her. Shugaha couldn't stop thinking about whether it was okay to fall for him. For a moment she tried to forget what happened last night, when she had taken care of him in bed. But she just couldn't shake off the memory. Asuna had a special place in Kazuto's heart, and she knew it. But for some reason that didn't seem to matter to her. Lately she couldn't stop thinking about Kazuto, and it was really confusing her. She wasn't sure why he was on her mind so much, but one thing was certain, her feelings were no longer a mystery to herself. 2 months ago everything changed when the hospital called. Shuga had quickly run out of the house, not even waiting for her mom to catch up. Kazuto's face lit up with a smile as he lay in his hospital bed. And when their eyes met, tears sparkled in his. He reached out to her and whispered Shuga in that voice she knew so well. In that moment, something special happened inside her. She felt a strong desire to be by his side always, to chat with him more and never stop talking. She just couldn't push him into doing something he didn't want to do. As she practiced her swing with the wooden sword, she told herself it was okay to just watch from afar. Whoosh! The blade sliced through the air as she moved around the room. She stopped for a second to glance at the clock in the living room. Yikes! It was already past noon. "Ah, crap," she said to herself. "I totally forgot about my promise." She leaned the sword against the wall and grabbed the towel hanging from a pine branch to wipe away her sweat. The sky was finally clearing up with a patch of blue peeking through the clouds. I headed back to my room and swapped my clothes for something more casual. I put my phone on silent mode and plopped down on my bed. Next I unzipped my backpack and pulled out the game Agile had given me, Alfheim Online. From what he'd told me it sounded like a big deal. But one thing that caught my attention was that there's no level system, which meant I wouldn't be at a huge disadvantage for starting late. Usually before diving into an online game like this I'd read up on all the tips and tricks I could find online or in magazines. But today I just wasn't in the mood for all that research. I ripped open the package and found a tiny ROM card inside. I carefully pulled it out and slid it into a small slot on my nerve gear. After a few seconds, the blinking light on the front stopped flashing and shone steadily. I lay back on my bed, holding the device right above my face. It used to be a super cool navy blue color. But now the paint was chipping off in some spots, making it look a bit worn out. These shackles had kept me trapped for 2 long years. But they were also like an old buddy that had been with me through thick and thin. We'd been through some crazy stuff together and they never failed me. I silently asked them to help me out one more time. Then I carefully put on the nerve gear headset. Next I strapped on the chin harness to keep everything in place. Finally I lowered the visor shield over my eyes, getting ready for what was next. I closed my eyes tight, feeling my heart beat super fast with excitement and a little bit of nervousness. I took a deep breath and said the magic words, "Link start." Suddenly the dim light that had been shining through my eyelids disappeared. It was like my eyes were turned off and I was surrounded by total darkness. But just as quickly, a burst of colorful lights appeared in front of me, like a rainbow exploding into view. The light started to take shape, forming the Nerve Gear logo. At first it was fuzzy and hard to see, but as my brain connected with the device, the logo got clearer. Soon, a message popped up under the logo, letting me know that everything was working properly. Then, a weird noise appeared out of nowhere. It sounded like it was moving closer and closer, and the sound kept changing, until it turned into a cool harmonious tune. The serious startup music began, and then suddenly stopped. The audio connection was ready to go. Next, the system moved on to checking my physical feelings, like how I felt in bed and the pull of gravity. But as it checked each sense, something weird happened. The feeling of the bed against my back and the weight of my body vanished. As each test was completed, a check mark appeared, and they started piling up. As time went on, fancy technology would probably make this process way faster. But for now, I just had to be patient and wait for my headgear to connect with each part of my brain. It was like watching a computer shake hands with my mind. When it finally finished, a message popped up saying everything was okay. Then, suddenly, I was surrounded by darkness. Suddenly, a bright circle of rainbow light burst up from below. As I stepped through it, my virtual feet touched down in a whole new world. It was still pretty dark, but I could see that I was in some kind of setup area for creating my account. The Alfheim Online logo floated above me, and a soft, friendly voice said hello, and welcome to the game. I listened to the voice's instructions and started making my account and character. A pale blue keyboard popped up in front of me, floating in mid-air. It asked for my user ID and password. I started typing the same letters I used when I first played SAO. Usually at this point in an online game, you'd have to pay to keep playing. But since I had the retail version of ALO, I got a free month to play around. Next, it was time to choose my character's name. I was about to type Kratos, but I stopped myself. Not many people knew that in the real world, Kazuto Kurege was known as Kratos Online. Only a handful of people were in on this secret. The rescue team from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Shuzuyuki, the president of RCT, who had worked closely with them, and Shugo. After that, only two more people found out: Agil and Asuna, who was still sleeping at the time. Only a few people knew what really went down in Satsio. Not even my parents or Sugoa had a clue. The whole thing was kept super secret, especially when it came to the players' characters. Inside the game there were tons of battles between players, and sadly some of those fights led to real-life deaths. If the truth about who killed who got out, it would be a huge mess with lawsuits going on forever. For now, everyone was blaming Akihiko Kaba, the guy behind SEO, for all the murders. He was still missing, so all the blame was piled on him. The families of the victims wanted money from Argus, the company that made the game. This led to big problems for Argus, and soon they went bankrupt. Kaba had helped make Argus a top game developer, but then he brought it crashing down. The government didn't want players to sue each other, which could have been a huge mess. I was worried that someone named Nobuyuki Shugo might find me. But I decided my name wasn't special enough to cause trouble, so I chose Kirito as my username. I picked male as my character's gender, which made sense. Then a female voice told me to create my character. My only option was to choose my player race. That was it. Imagine creating a character, but having zero control over how they look. That's what happened to me. All my characters' appearance settings were chosen randomly. If I didn't like the way they turned out, I'd have to pay a fee within the game to change them. But honestly, I wasn't too fussy about my character's looks. The cool part was that I got to choose from 9 different fairy-themed races. Each one was unique and exciting in its own way. The voice explained that each option had its pros and cons. Some names like Salamander, Sylph and Gnome sounded super familiar from other role-playing games. But others, like Kate Sith and Leprechaun, were a bit more unusual. It didn't really matter to me though. I wasn't planning on getting too serious about the game. One thing that did catch my eye was the all-black gear that came with the Spriggan choice. I liked the way it looked, so I picked that one and clicked OK. Now that I'd finished customizing everything, the computer voice wished me good luck. Suddenly I was surrounded by another swirling vortex of light. As I appeared in this new world, everything felt surreal. One minute I was standing somewhere else, and the next I was floating in mid-air. The ground beneath me had vanished, leaving me weightless for a brief moment before gravity kicked in and pulled me down. As my vision cleared, I saw a small town unfolding below me, shrouded in darkness. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. My senses were on high alert, and every detail felt super sharp. It had been 2 months since I last experienced the thrill of full dive gameplay, but now it all came flooding back. Every virtual sensation felt fresh and exciting again, like my nerves were being re-netted. The tall pointy towers of the castle in the town center were getting closer and closer. Then, suddenly, everything stopped moving. The picture froze and started to break apart into tiny pieces. It was like a million little shards of glass splintering off. The image began to distort and fill with static, like a lightning bolt flashing across my screen. The details in the game started to disappear, making everything look blocky and fuzzy, like a puzzle made out of pixels. The world around me started to melt and crumble. I cried out, "What's happening?" and suddenly felt myself falling again. Down, 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 I went, with nothing but darkness below me. I screamed, "What's going on here?" But my voice was swallowed up by the empty space and disappeared into silence. Above me, a huge moon hung in the sky, casting a blue glow over the deep forest. It was like being underwater. In Alfheim, the nights were really short, but it would still be a while before the sun came up and brought some light to the darkness. The forest was usually super spooky, but right now its darkness was a good thing. Leafa peeked out from behind a huge tree, and gazed up at the starry sky. Luckily she didn't see any scary shapes flying overhead. She whispered to her friend, "Get ready. Get ready to take off, our wings will be charged soon." Leafa said. But Reckon wasn't so sure. "Pip, I'm still feeling dizzy," he complained. Leafa rolled her eyes. "You're still feeling sick? That's just sad. When are you going to get used to flying?" Reckon looked down, embarrassed. "I don't know, I just can't help it. I'm really scared of flying." Leafa let out a frustrated sigh. She and Reckon were friends in the real world, and they had started playing the online game Alfheim Online together. Now as they sat at the foot of a virtual tree, Reckon was struggling to keep up. Reckon had been playing the game for a whole year just like Leafa, but despite all that practice he still got flight sickness. It was pretty funny, because in this game being good at fighting in midair was super important. The problem was Reckon could only handle 1 or 2 battles at a time before he started feeling queasy. That made him not very useful in big fights. But Leafa didn't really care about that part of Reckon's gaming skills. She thought of him like a little brother who always needed help. His looks matched his personality perfectly. He was short and fragile with yellow-green hair that fell to his shoulders in a straight cut. His long ears drooped down and his face always looked like he was about to cry. When she first saw him in the game, Leafa almost burst out laughing because he looked so much like the real thing. It turned out that her own character's look wasn't so random either. According to Reckon, it suited her just as well.